The Case of the Missing General, Chapter 6, Steven and Sheila Make a Hasty Exit. Steven and Sheila, with Whiskers held tightly in her arms, ran out of the general's apartment and rushed into the elevator. When they had reached the main lobby and the elevator doors opened, Sheila stifled a cry of alarm at the sight of Sal engaged in what looked to be a rather serious conversation with two men wearing matching brown suits. Steven tucked the general's chart under his arm to better hide it from the men's view and proceeded to quickly size up the situation. Fortunately, the two men had not taken any particular notice of Steven and Sheila as they continued to be intently focused on their conversation with Sal and so were not looking in the direction of the elevator. Sal had only blinked in momentary surprise when he spotted them, and then most impressively, he had managed to regain his composure immediately. Steven looked pointedly over at Sheila, who nodded briefly to let him know that she too understood that Sal was distracting the two men for them. Steven and Sheila stepped out of the elevator in unison, and walking as nonchalantly as they could, they passed directly by Sal and the two men. As they slipped past the lobby's front desk, they could hear fragments of Sal's heated discussion with the two men. Words and phrases like project, breach of classified materials and general hung in the air like a heavy fog, making the hairs on the back of Steven's neck stand on end. It took every ounce of composure for them not to break into a hurried pace, their instincts screaming that they were in dangerous territory. It was a huge relief then when they finally and mercifully exited the apartment complex without incident. Once outside in the cool and crisp night air, the nearby flickering streetlight illuminated Sheila's worried expression. "What do you think those men want with my father?" she whispered, shivering not so much from the cold, but from the dread of confrontation they had just narrowly evaded. Steven lowered his voice even further and put his arm around her to comfort her. "I believe those men may very well be rogue agents. Whatever their level of involvement might be though, one thing is clear, I don't think they know where your father is. However, they seem desperate to find him." Sheila gasped out loud. "Oh Steven, what if it was one of those men who phoned me and told me to keep my head down?" Sheila shivered at the memory. "I will never forget how menacing that man sounded, Steven, and if men like that are after my father—" Here Sheila's voice trailed off, the implications too vast and terrifying for her to articulate. Steven gently steered Sheila back in the direction of the car. "I know things seem overwhelming right now, but the good news is your father was somehow able to give those two men the slip, and we are about to head to your father's coordinates right now." Somewhat comforted, Sheila nodded and gave him a half smile as she got into Steven's car with Whiskers. Steven slid into the driver's seat and after giving her hand a reassuring squeeze, he passed the general's chart over to her and started the car. As they made their hasty retreat, Steven noted with surprise that the clock on the dashboard read that it was now already 5:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. As soon as they left the parking lot, Sheila began reciting the directions to the location her father had circled on the chart, and as Steven focused on the road ahead, he kept an anxious and keen eye on the rearview mirror, halfway expecting to see the men in brown suits in hot pursuit behind them. Thankfully, he saw no real evidence that they were being followed, and Sheila's estimation of an hour's drive time had been correct. They arrived at their destination just as streaks of yellow and orange light were stretching their way across the horizon, and after intently surveying the location, Steven was puzzled to find what appeared to be an empty and somewhat unremarkable plot of open land. He also noticed how secluded the area was, and with no official parking, he had no choice but to park on the grass. No sooner had he put the car in park and turned off the ignition when Sheila enthusiastically pointed to the only other parked vehicle in the area and shouted with excitement, "We found him, Steven! I would know that Jeep anywhere, that is my father's prized Jeep Wrangler." Steven's heart raced with a blend of exhilaration and fear at the news. Finding the general's jeep was a real confirmation that they were on the right track, and Steven was relieved to see renewed hope on Sheila's face. He was just about to suggest that they begin searching the surrounding area on foot when a faint vibration quivered through the air. It was a low, almost unearthly hum that sent shivers racing down Steven's spine. He glanced toward the horizon then with a renewed urgency. "Did you hear that, Sheila?" he murmured, his voice barely carrying over the wind that had suddenly picked up. "Yes. It's like a loud heartbeat." "Where could it be coming from?" Sheila replied, her brow knitting with determination. She rushed out of the car, and pausing only long enough to scoop Whiskers up into her arms, she began scanning the area, her instincts guiding her. Steven hurried out of the car and joined her. "I am not sure, but how about we find out?" He was just as drawn to the source of the sound as Sheila was. In fact, he felt as if it were beckoning them. The landscape around them seemed to pulse, the grass stirring as though in a dance of anticipation. Was it really possible that the general's coordinates had led them to the location of an interdimensional portal? The thought both thrilled and terrified him, as he could not help but wonder just where all of this might be leading them. Stopping abruptly in her tracks, Sheila looked at Steven with wide eyes tinged with surprise and a hint of fear. "Steven, I think we are about to find out what happened to my father." Her voice trailed off then as the full impact hit her. Steven swallowed nervously before replying, "I am having the same thought." A sudden rustle from the underbrush made them jump, their hearts pounding against their ribs. "Did you hear that?" Sheila whispered, the urgency in her voice cutting through the morning stillness. "I heard it." "Let me go up ahead of you and let's check it out," Steven suggested, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him as they stealthily continued their approach, each step bringing a deeper conviction to Steven that they were heading directly toward the general's interdimensional portal. Suddenly the rustling from the underbrush increased and there was a loud screech as a sleek black SUV appeared and blocked their way. Shaking his head in confusion and alarm, Steven knew it had to be the two men in brown suits. How had they followed them without Steven detecting it? His heart was pounding as he glanced worriedly back at Sheila. She stood frozen to the spot, staring wide-eyed as the SUV door swung open, revealing one of the men in the brown suit. The man's expression was inscrutable as he stepped out of the vehicle, and for one awful instant Steven and the man's eyes met. Panic surged through Steven and he immediately broke his gaze with the man and turned to look at Sheila, hoping to give her a silent assurance that they would escape. Tilting his head ever so slightly, he whispered to her, "Now," and broke out into a full run. Whiskers, seeing Steven running, jumped out of Sheila's arms and ran ahead of Steven as if to guide him. Steven followed after Whiskers and motioned wildly for Sheila to catch up with him. She did so quickly and they continued running for who knows how long, relying on pure gut instinct to guide them away from their pursuer. Daring to glance behind him, Steven saw no sign of the man in the brown suit and let out a sigh of relief. Sheila's breath quickened next to him as she spotted Whiskers, who was still ahead of them, entering the door of what appeared to be an old, weathered shack. Hope flared in her chest at the sight of possible shelter for them. "Steven, look what Whiskers found." Steven nodded, and racing together towards it, they carefully pushed the slightly ajar door fully open. Once inside, they stepped cautiously forward and found Whiskers sitting calmly on his haunches and waiting for them in the center of the shack's main room. After catching her breath, Sheila spoke, "Steven, those two men must have followed us." Steven's reporter instincts flared anew. "I know it looks that way, but I kept checking for them on our drive and I feel sure no one was following us, which makes me think those men were already planning to come here." With a start of surprise, Steven spied a long, narrow corridor directly behind where Whiskers was sitting. At the sight of it he knew they were in no shack at all, but a building cleverly designed from the outside to appear as one. Craning his neck to peer further down the corridor, he could just make out the faint flickering of fluorescent lights. It was then that he also realized that the air inside was humming with the very same energy he and Sheila had felt earlier. Steadying himself, he looked over at Sheila and whispered, "This is not a shack." Sheila's eyes widened as Steven continued. "I think we might be inside the headquarters of the Portal Project." Sheila gasped and whispered back, "Then this could be the very same project they did not want my father filing a report on." Steven's brow furrowed as he thought more deeply about it. What if the general knew the project had been compromised by rogue factions? Steven pondered the sheer magnitude of it all. The implications were bigger than he could have imagined, and with the potential of interdimensional mysteries falling into the wrong hands, it started to make more and more sense why the general might have gone against direct orders. He could have decided that the cost of an investigation would be worth it in the end. Just then Steven's train of thought was interrupted as the low hum permeating the air had grown more intense, and motioning for Sheila to follow him, he moved cautiously in the direction of the corridor. Upon entering, they found the walls adorned with a slick metallic sheen that reflected the eerie glow of the fluorescent lights as they flickered in rhythm with the energy pulsing around them. "Do you think the portal is really here?" Sheila asked, her voice barely above a whisper, tinged with anxiety and excitement. Steven nodded. "Yes, I think there is a very good chance it is." Steven stopped in his tracks, and they now could hear faint sounds echoing in the distance across between beeping machinery and hushed voices that seemed to weave through the very fabric of the air. On instinct, Steven placed his hand on the door at the end of the corridor, and feeling its cool surface beneath his palm, he turned the handle ever so slightly. To his surprise, he heard a soft click and knew it was unlocked. "Wait." Sheila reached out, grabbing his arm. "This seems too easy. If what we think is really behind that door, why would it be unlocked?" Steven stepped back cautiously, and his gaze was full of concern. "I don't know why it's unlocked, Sheila, and I agree it does seem strange, but this is what we came here to do, to find out if such a portal exists. There really is no other way to know for sure if we have found the portal." Sheila took a deep breath and nodded. "I know, Steven, you are completely right. We have to do this. I just feel scared. Oh, and Steven, where is Whiskers?" As if on cue, Whiskers came running stealthily down the corridor toward them and jumped straight up into her arms. Sheila smiled with relief in spite of her nerves and looked at Steven with a renewed resolve. "Okay, I am ready now, Steven. Go ahead and open the door."